Hi everyone, welcome to a new devlog. In this episode, we'll be looking at some updates to the enemy AI and combat system. So let's get started. At the moment, the enemy AI is still pretty simple and its perception system is currently only visual. I want to keep the system as simple as possible because as you add complexity, it's harder to detect where the problems are. In the future, I want to add other perceptions like hearing and contact. For now, the enemy only detects us if we are in his field of view and if our position is valid in the nav mesh. Otherwise, he moves randomly from one point to another in his area. The behavior tree has only 3 states: roaming, chasing the player, and attacking. Within the attack, we have 2 sub-behaviors: dodge or attack. The dodging system depends on the type of enemy. Each enemy has a chance to dodge, and this adds more complexity and randomness to the combat. The enemy only dodges if his chance succeeds. In that case, I look at the 3 possible directions: back, right, and left with a ray cast. The ray cast makes sure there are no obstacles or the player in the possible directions, and on the other hand, it makes sure that the chosen direction doesn't take the enemy out of the nav mesh. If more than one direction is available, it chooses one randomly. And if there are no possible directions, its dodge condition fails, and so it attacks us. This is especially realistic when cornering the enemy. Within the chasing system, we have 2 behaviors also based on the blocking radius. This setting depends on the type of enemy. When the enemy first detects us, he equips himself and heads towards us. When he enters his blocking radius, the enemy changes his animation to blocking. This doesn't mean that it can block our attacks. It's purely aesthetic, but also more intimidating because when we see the enemy getting ready, we know nothing good can come from him. Once in combat, both the enemy and the player already take damage and play their hit animations. For the enemy, I'm going to use the heavy hits as that allows for better crowd control, giving other enemies a chance to enter in combat, while also giving clear feedback to the player that the attack has been successful. For now, crowd control is very simple. When there is a situation with multiple enemies, only one can attack at once while the others wait. By taking damage, physically pushes the enemy further away. It allows for closer enemies to engage in combat. This is a bit more realistic as in real life, it would be hardly believable that enemies would wait their turn to attack us while we exterminate their friends. On the other hand, the enemy has a block chance. This is a setting depending on the type of enemy as well. When the enemy gets hit, he has a chance to block the attack. If his chance fails, he takes damage, but if he succeeds, he blocks the attack. Here I want to add a new stat for both the player and the enemy, and that is the poise or block resistance ability. This stat will be decreased every time there is a successful block, so both the player and the enemy can consume all their poise, leaving them without the ability to block. This system is designed to avoid extremely defensive combat where you are constantly blocking. The poise will be self-regenerating. The rate of regeneration will depend on the type of enemy, and in the case of the player, it can be a setting that can be upgraded when we level up. When the poise is consumed, it will penalize with a stun, which will leave the character inactive for a few seconds, vulnerable to more attacks. This design especially forces the player to be strategic and not spam the block if he doesn't want to put himself in danger. This can be the perfect scenario to add finishers. I'm designing the game to be used preferably with a controller. This causes some problems as the available buttons are limited. And with so many functionalities, I have to start reusing buttons, giving them different actions depending on the context. Right now, I already have all the buttons in use, so block and sprint use the same button. To separate the functionality, you can only sprint when you are not using your weapons in your hands, and you can only block when you are using your weapons, which I think looks more realistic. On the other hand, I have added a soft lock on target system. This system can be activated manually, or in case of combat, it activates automatically by choosing the nearest enemy. For now, when an enemy can be targeted, I show the exclamation point. I will change this later as it looks like they are on alert, but I needed a quick debug way to know when enemies enter the targeting radius. When we have enemies in radius, we can press R2 and the player focuses the movement on the nearest enemy. This helps our attacks to be more successful, otherwise we have to always execute attacks in the direction of the enemy. On the other hand, I have some doubts about the system. As players, what do you prefer, a manual system, automatic, or a mix of both? Finally, I have added a different camera setting for when we sprint. The camera moves away from the player, opening the field of view, which increases the feeling of speed of the player while giving us more control by having a bigger range of vision. And that was all for this episode. As always, thank you very much for watching and see you next week.